Why can't John McClane just ever have a quiet Christmas? Bah humbug. Hello, my fellow YouTubers and subscribers, and welcome to my latest movie review, where today I review the second film in the Die Hard franchise. Die Hard 2, or Die Hard 2, Die Harder, whatever you want to call it. Released in 1990 and directed by Renny Harlin. I apologise for the delay with this review. I've been a little bit busy, I've been working, so I've only just managed to get around to doing this. So anyway, Die Hard 2, basically the story is as follows. John McClane attempts to avert disaster as rogue military operatives seize control of Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. Okay, so Die Hard 2. Well, if you didn't already know, this movie is pretty much the same movie as the first one. At the end of the day, it's a typical kind of staple of action movies that the sequels are always going to be slightly similar to their predecessors. But Die Hard 2 is pretty much exactly the same. The only difference being it's set in an airport. That's the only difference between the first one and the second one. They even play the same song at the end of this movie. The Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow. And it's set at Christmas again, because why not? But sadly for me, unlike the first movie, which really was a very great movie, in that it was very unique, one of the most unique action movies ever made, and certainly very simple but effective, and certainly with the villains as well, very effective, and it was very slick and very stylish, cool, and it was different. Sadly for me, this one kind of falls into the kind of bland category of sequelitis, if that makes sense. I feel that this movie suffers from being overly familiar to its predecessor. I knew it was going to be familiar, obviously. I knew it was going to be the same in some context because it's an action movie and it's a sequel to an action movie. But for me, there isn't much of a plot to this movie. It is the same story. It's just a terrorist attack, except it's at an airport, which seems like the most obvious place to, to have a terrorist attack, but whatever. Does it mean the movie's bad? No. I do like this movie. I thought it was good enough. I thought it was adequate. I thought it was a perfectly decent installment, but it really wasn't as riveting as the first one. My first general issue with the movie is, at times the pacing is very sluggish. For me, this movie took a long time to get going, and I was surprised because I thought it was going to be pretty much all action through the entirety of the 2-hour runtime. Now, don't get me wrong, just because I said the movie's sluggish doesn't mean that I want more of an abundance of action sequences. I'm not saying that, but for me, the plot was too thin, and there could have been something a bit more to it, because the first act of this movie, dare I say even the first half of this movie, was quite slow, in my opinion. I did find myself struggling to kind of get into this one, whereas the first movie, we had 20 minutes to set the scene and develop the characters, and then bam, we're right into the midst of the situation, and it threw you in the most effective way possible, and it maintained that consistent pace. With this one, the pacing is very uneven for this movie. There are parts of it which do move fairly briskly, and then when the movie stops, it just stops. I mean, dare I say it, I shouldn't say this because action scenes aren't the be-all and end-all of movies, but in the case of Die Hard, the movies are so focused on the action that, heck, I wouldn't have minded some more action. I think, to be honest, in that first half of the movie, it was rocky, and I think they probably should have cut some of this movie out. The first half an hour, particularly, was a drag, in my opinion, and there wasn't much that John was doing. Pretty much the entire movie, his wife is on another aeroplane, and she's dealing with another character who we don't really care about, but we focus on her anyway. And then John is pretty much stranded at the airport on his own, and then he's trying to deal with the situation. To begin with, I don't know, it just didn't seem to go anywhere until the second half of the movie kicks in, and then bam, okay, we're into this Die Hard movie now. And there's a few twists and turns along the way, like with the villains and then the major of the military group and everything, and there's a couple of characters who are double crosses, so to speak. But I was entertained. I was entertained in this movie. I did enjoy the action when it was there. The action was very impressive, particularly the final scene aboard the plane. I really did enjoy the finale on top of the aeroplane. I thought that was a very well choreographed fight, and it was a very entertaining fight, and it had a lot of weight to it. I just felt like the situation, well, it did escalate, of course, and then, you know, it got to the point where everybody in the airport was panicking. There was hysteria. I just felt the escalation of the situation worked a lot better in the first movie, because we'd got to the inciting incident of the story a lot quicker. Like, the terrorists entered the story a lot quicker, and action kicked off a lot quicker, and the pace was a lot quicker. So the natural escalation built and built, and you were there, you were with it, you felt the tension. For me, there was no tension to this movie, and I hate to say that, because I know some people really like this movie, but for me, because of the uneven pacing, I was struggling to really kind of feel anything, if that made sense. I know it's an action movie, but I was struggling to feel the escalation of the plot. There were certain moments where I was like, oh, whoa, God. There's some brutal moments, and certainly with the fight scenes, there's brutal ways in which certain characters go out. Particularly the guy with the ice in his eye. That was particularly brutal. Like I said, it's fun to watch, but I just thought cohesively the first movie was a lot better. Bruce Willis does give a good performance, as before. Again, usual kind of performance like he did in the first movie, and again, some of his lines are a bit strange. There's one particular line of dialogue which I did find bizarre, like really bizarre, like when he's fighting with the Major at the very end, and he says, I liked you, McClane, we could have been friends. And he's like, I don't need any more friends. And then he just kicks him into the propeller, and it's like, what? I don't need any more friends. That's not like a classic action movie line. I'm sorry, that just came off as real corny. Also, I mean, the setting of the airport, it is a good setting, and obviously, you know, it's stereotypically a setting for a terrorist attack. I mean, it's a place where, in real life, terrorist attacks have happened, and obviously it's not nice that they've happened, but it's a very obvious choice, I think, for the setting of this movie. So I didn't think the movie was that endearing, to be honest, whereas in the first film it was a simple choice to have it in this building, but it worked because you could navigate into various parts of the building. With an airport, you kind of know what you're going to get. I just didn't think there was much in the way to surprise us in terms of the location, in terms of what varieties that offered with the action sequences or with the story. It was just kind of plain, and that's kind of how I feel about this movie. It's plain, but it's fun. You know, it's fun to watch, but it is plain. And as for the villains of this movie, I personally found them just to be kind of mediocre. They were all right, but, well, let's face it, they're no Alan Rickman. Hans Gruber, what a fantastic character in the first film. But in this movie, the villains were just throwaway villains, and you know, I couldn't really care less about them, but, you know, whatever. So overall, Die Hard 2, it's a good movie. It's perfectly adequate, and it's perfectly fun and enjoyable, but the uneven pacing really affects it for me, and I didn't feel like the movie's story was there. I mean, even though the first movie had a brief story, it was at least more expansive, and it kind of escalated more than this one does, or at least it escalated better than this one does. But it is an entertaining action movie. It's a fun romp. There's good fun to be had. Bruce Willis is perfectly fine, but it is overly familiar to its predecessor, and I think that is what really damages it. They've just tried to do the same thing again, and they've just done a slightly less good version. So overall, I'm going to give Die Hard 2 a respectable 7 out of 10.
Fire is slowly dying, and my dear, we're still goodbying. But as long as you love me so, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
So that's my review of Die Hard 2. So what did you think? Please comment down below, let me know, and please hit that subscribe button. It would be most appreciated. I do loads of movie reviews, TV reviews. Please stay tuned for more content. So, next time on Movie Review, I will be reviewing Die Hard 3, Die Hard with a Vengeance. So until next time, I'm Mr. TARDIS11. See you soon. Bye for now.